Hi, and welcome to the Intro to the Skeletal System lecture. This is a short introduction to the anatomy of the skeletal system, and we're going to touch a little bit on cell types as well in this. So we'll start with the 5 functions of the skeletal system. Number 1, it allows us to move. Your bones are what attach the muscles. The contraction of the muscles pulls the bones and creates movement. It does this in your arms and your legs. The muscles contract, they pull on the tendon, which is connected to the bone, and that therefore moves the bone and creates movement. The second function is for support. The backbone is really the main support for your whole body. This includes the vertebrae, which is connected to the inferior part of your skull. And in addition to support, it helps to protect organs. For example, the vertebrae here protects the spinal cord that runs through the middle of it. Then in the thoracic region, you have a rib cage coming around, and that rib cage protects all the organs in the thoracic cavity. So protection and support are 2 other major roles of the skeletal system. The 4th one is that it makes blood. In your bone marrow, you have cells that make blood cells, both red and white blood cells. Red and white blood cells are both formed by bone marrow, and that's going to be found in the medullary cavity of bones. The medullary cavity is this open cavity that's in the middle of the bone. The last major function is for storage. Bones are a very large storage site for things like calcium and phosphorus. Anytime your body wants to help to balance out your blood calcium and phosphorus levels, normally it does an exchange with your bones. Now, 3 major cell types. You have to remember these 3 cell types. These are great test questions. First type of cell is called an osteoblast. Then you have osteocyte and an osteoclast. If you notice, the prefix is osteo for all of these. Osteo means bone. So what is the difference between these 3 cell types? Well, let's look at osteoblasts and osteoclasts first. Osteoblasts are cells that build bone. I like to think of it as blast. Blasts build bone. So blasts build bone. So osteoblasts will build up your bone, but they also have a role in repairing your bone. Osteoclasts are cells that cause absorption of bone. Essentially what this means is bone breakdown. Osteoclasts release minerals from inside the bone, causing that bone to break down. Osteocytes, these guys do not build or break down bone. This is the name of the mature osteoblast cell that is embedded within the bone matrix. You're going to see this type of cell when we talk about what's called an osteon. It is the dense, hard structural unit inside of your bones. So osteoblasts build bone, osteoclast break down bone, and the osteocyte is the name of a mature bone cell that is already found within the osteon of a bone. So the periosteum is a lining, you see in red here, covering the bone. This periosteum is essential to bone health. It covers the bone with a dense fibrous membrane, very strong, and it contains the blood vessels that will ultimately go into the compact bone and into the medullary cavity. So from the outside to the inside, so we have the periosteum. Underneath the periosteum is the compact bone. Underneath the compact bone here, you see almost like a sponge. It's called spongy bone. And then in the middle, you have the medullary cavity. And inside of here, you have yellow bone marrow. Now, you may say, where's the red bone marrow? Red bone marrow is found in the spongy bone. Now, types of bones based on their composition. we have something called compact bone. You saw that in the illustration just now. Compact bone is just like the name states, very nice, hard, and compact. It is made of structures called osteons. If you recall, I mentioned this word when we were talking about the cells of the bone. And an osteon is really this circle structure right over here. Your bone is made of hundreds of these. Osteons are made up of their own structural units. In the middle of each osteon, you have what's called a haversian canal. This is where you have a lot of the nervous system and blood supply running through laterally and vertically. You have these purple lake-like structures. These are called lacuna. That word is here. Lacuna are full of osteocytes. This is where your osteocytes are found. And then you have lamellae. Those are these concentric circles. They kind of go around in a circular pattern. That's called lamellae. And then the lamellae are connected by these lateral lines. Looks like almost like cracks in there. Those are called canaliculi. Canaliculi are going to be connecting your lamellae. So this whole thing is the structure of one osteon. There are hundreds of osteons in compact bone. Then underneath the compact bone, you have what's called that spongy bone. It's also known as cancellous bone. It is very lightweight and it is full of red bone marrow. Spongy bone is going to be found in areas of low stress. It's going to be found at the ends of long bones, in the ribs, sternum, hips, vertebrae, and cranium. Spongy bone doesn't have a haversian system. And again, if I go back to this slide, I believe, you see over here, you have blood vessels going in through that compact bone transversely. That's what a haversian system is. A haversian system is a system of blood vessels running through the bones. You're not going to have that within the spongy bone. And in the spongy bone, you have a web-like arrangement. Now, just to briefly touch on classifying bones by shape, you have 5 major bone shapes: long, short, flat, irregular, and sesamoid. I'm going to go through each one, and your job is to remember the examples of the bones that are part of each shape. These are test questions. So long bones, just like the name states, they're the long bones in your body, like the ones in your arms and your legs. Hence, they're the ones in your extremities. The femur, the tibia, the fibula, humerus, ulna, and so on and so forth. Long bones act as levers, just like your elbow or your knee. Those are both levers. And long bones structurally, if I may draw this for you, let's just draw a typical long bone. Let's do something that looks like this, maybe like a femur. Okay. So your long bone is going to have the tips, and then it's going to have the central long shaft. You have 2 terms here, epiphyses and diaphyses. The epiphyses are going to be the ends of the bones. This is where you're going to find your spongy bone. These are going to be the areas that are covered with hyaline cartilage, and I'm going to change the color here. Let's do yellow. Cartilage is going to be found in these areas here and these areas here. So you'll find the hyaline cartilage at the epiphyses. This is also where you'll have your bone articulation. So if this is your femur, your pelvis would articulate here, and your tibia would articulate here. The diaphyses is the center shaft of the bone. This is where you're going to have your medullary cavity full of yellow bone marrow. And yellow bone marrow is mainly fat. This is really what people go to restaurants to eat. They take the yellow bone marrow, they can saute it with some seasonings, and they put it back into the bone for presentation. This yellow bone marrow that's made of primarily fat is very, very high in white blood cells and nutrients. Then you've got short bones. Those are going to be, let me change my color again. Those are going to be these cube-shaped bones here. So These are the bones that are found in your wrist and in your ankle. These guys allow for flexible movement, bending and sliding and gliding. These guys are cancellous bone or spongy bone covered by compact bone. They're going to be found in your carpals and your tarsals. Flat bones are going to be what protect your vital organs. Things like your sternum is a flat bone. You have scapula, which is back here, your blades, which are flat bones. And then you have facial bones, which are also flat bones. Then moving on to irregular bones. These are the weirdly shaped bones like your pelvis or your vertebrae. These also include your ribs, your hyoid, and the tiny bones that are found in your ears. These are mostly for protection and flexibility. And then you've got the sesamoid bones. These are extra bones found in certain regions of your body. The patella is one of those bones. This is called a sesamoid bone. Now, we're kind of moving on to bone markings now, which is going to be mostly helpful with your lab material. Bone markings, when you end up coming into lab and looking at the actual bones, you'll notice that there's like ridges, cracks, crevices, holes, openings, canals that are found on the bones. These aren't just mistakes or arbitrary features. These all have function and purpose. The purpose of these bone markings is to provide attachment sites for tendons, for ligaments to connect other bones through. They're sites of attachments for muscles. They allow for blood vessels and nerves to go in and out. And you're going to be using these landmarks and naming them on the bones for your lab exam. These landmarks and the bone markings are going to be listed on your bones list, which is under your modules. Please make sure to go look at those. Here's some examples of bone markings. I'm not going to read through this right now, but just know that you'll be seeing these terms quite often in your bones list. Again, this is going to be mostly important for your lab exam. However, this would be a great matching section for your lecture exam as well. Now, I know we just briefly touched on bone marrow. You have two kinds of bone marrow in your bones. You have yellow bone marrow, which is found in the medullary cavity. It is mainly fat storage. And you have red bone marrow. Red bone marrow is your hematopoietic tissue. This is what creates your red blood cell line. And in adults, it's going to be found in the spongy bone of things like vertebrae, hips, sternum, the ends of the femur and the humerus, because those are quite large in terms of size. And that red bone marrow is going to be responsible for making red blood cells, platelets, some of your white blood cells, and it helps with destroying and creating new red blood cells. Now, the last 3 slides I've put in here just as a little review for you. It's not due by any means, but please use it to help test yourself. This is exactly what your lab exam is going to look like. It'll have a bone and it'll have markings that'll say, please name A, B, C, D, and E. For example, this is a typical vertebrae. This would be your spinous process. This would be your transverse process. Then you've got some facets in here, like here. You've got that guy there, and you've got that guy there. All of those features are going to be on your bones list. So go ahead and go through and try to quiz yourself and see how much of this you know before you really dive into the axial and appendicular skeleton PowerPoint and videos. Don't forget to email me if you have any questions. Thank you.